When it comes to modern day television, it doesn't get much better than Donald Glover's Atlanta. Having just concluded its final run after only 4 seasons, Atlanta managed to engage audiences through their surrealistic portrait of the modern world and in many ways influenced TV series that we're getting today, like Reservation Dogs, Swarm, and I'm a Virgo. Season 1 of Atlanta premiered all the way back in 2016, with a second season releasing shortly after, both of which gained critical acclaim for the way it mixed humor, drama, and societal commentary, and presented it in a sharp, well-directed way. This was definitely helped by Donald's continued collaboration with his brother Stephen Glover and friend Hiro Murai, who on top of directing most of Atlanta's episodes, has also directed music videos for Earl Sweatshirt, Block Party, and of course,
This is America. Don't catch you slipping now. Don't catch you slipping now. Look what I'm whipping now.
But after season 2 ended in 2018, it would be nearly 4 years until Atlanta got a new season. Donald Glover and the writers took their time to work their writing over during the pandemic, and audiences got the most experimental season yet. A lot of the main cast wasn't in most of the episodes, the stories leaned more and more into the surreal or over-exaggerated aspects of life, and they attempted new styles of filmmaking too. Some people had their issues with this new turn for the show, but my experience with the 3rd season was one that confirmed my already established opinion. To me, Atlanta had always thrived in its unique approach at both world building and dealing with themes, and season 3 was just a recommitment to this style. The 3rd season finished in May 2022, and just 4 months later, the show ran its final season, concluding in November 2022, with a finale that is, in my opinion, easily one of the best written finales for a TV series I've ever seen. It's so simple, almost everything a series finale shouldn't be. You could pick this episode up and place it in any other spot, and it would just blend in. But despite this, it manages to mix 2 very Atlanta storylines that ends on a happy note for each of the characters. Something that, looking back, is kind of surprising. The show could get dark at times. In just 41 episodes, Atlanta managed to stick out of the overwhelming amount of TV shows and instead create its own visual and aesthetic style. It's been talked about a lot by people much more intelligent than me, but Atlanta uses an artistic style called Afro-Surrealism to influence its depiction of the world. Afro-Surrealism, in its most basic explanation, uses elements of the Surrealist art movement and mixes it with both elements of African culture as well as the experiences of black people in the world. A good example of Afro-Surrealism is from a show called Random Acts of Flyness, in which a cop hits a black man on his bike and then steps out to harass him. A white man runs to the cop to inform him he's the man's white witness, and the cop lets him go, informing him to keep the witness close. It's a pretty basic skit, and one that clearly exemplifies traits of Afro-Surrealism. The concept of hiring a person to vouch for you every time you interact with a cop is absurd, but it's true that if you are a person of color being harassed by the police, it might be beneficial to have a white friend be there as well, backing you up and acting as a witness. This absurd reality, brought to its logical conclusion under capitalism and presented matter-of-factly, is a prime example of Afro-Surrealist art. If this sounds familiar, that's probably because it is. Atlanta is just one of a growing trend of Afro-Surrealist media that interprets the world through black experiences, such as Get Out, Sorry to Bother You, and They Clone Tyrone. Using this style allows each episode to have its own strange or funny way of dealing with another problem in each of our main characters' lives. The show is often analyzed through its depiction of issues of racial identity, and I won't deny that it's one of its biggest themes. However, I wanted to instead focus on how Atlanta portrays the threat of capitalism. Now, everyone knows that capitalism and things like race, gender, sexuality are all interlinked. They build off of one another, so I can't ignore other topics completely. But for the most part, I'm going to be focusing on the main character's interaction with money, both the excess and the lack of it, the world around them, its systems and its attitudes, as well as how their identity and art are commodified for profit. And what could be a better starting point than the first episode of the first season, The Big Bang? There's been video essays done on episode 1 of Atlanta alone. It's probably one of the best written pilot episodes ever, as it perfectly sets up the entire show in just 30 minutes. We're introduced to our protagonist Ern, a guy working a terribly paid job at an airport after he was expelled from his university for a reason that we don't find out for a very long time. He sometimes lives with his ex-girlfriend and mother of his child, Vanessa, but she's often unhappy with him not being able to support and be a stable father for their daughter Lottie. One day while at work, a co-worker shows him a music video for a rapper named Paperboy that's growing in popularity, and Ern recognizes him as his cousin Al. Ern goes to visit Al and asks about being his manager, but Al points out that Ern has been out of his life since his mother's funeral, and he knows he's only talking to him now because there's money involved. To gain his trust, Ern takes some of his saved cash and bribes a local radio station to play his cousin's tracks, and after Al gets some reassurances from Ern's father, decides to hire him as his manager. As Ern, Al, and his friend Darius enjoy their small win, someone comes by and damages Al's car, culminating in a shooting that gets two of them arrested. Now, while Atlanta would continue developing its slow and surrealist pace for seasons to come, the first episode tells us enough to be able to discuss the characters and their dynamics. Ern is a character who will continue to be influenced by money and what it represents for the rest of the show. Now he's poor, he owes debts to his ex, but at least he has a new opportunity thanks to the luck of having a famous rapper as his cousin and the startup cash used to bribe the DJ. Al, on the other hand, now finds himself in a position where he has money now, and in turn becomes cautious of his relationships. Now that he's in a position of power, he knows that people are going to come looking for some more opportunities. Something that isn't really discussed but is shown in the show though is that although Al's becoming famous, he still doesn't have any money from his music. Most of it is coming from selling drugs, which he then invests into his own career by making himself look richer than he is, buying studio time, buying equipment, whatever. I wish this was something that was more focused on in later episodes, because it is interesting that the one character that sort of made it out the mud, made it by selling substances banned by the state, and used that money to create the opportunities for himself that some people got from birth. Van was also not in this episode much, but throughout the show, she's a physical reminder of Ern's very real responsibility to his family and their financial situation. Out of these three characters in the show, Van is the one that is least focused on the accumulation of wealth. Both Ern and Al are explicitly out to make money, but for the most part, Van has found some level of comfort from her admittedly measly wages from her on-again, off-again employment at schools. But instead of resisting against the system or wishing to move up on the class scale, Van's discomfort often manifests in other ways, like focusing on how she presents herself and is viewed by others. And finally, we have Al's best friend, Darius, who I don't really know how to explain. He's like everyone's stoner friend who's always on something and really spaced out, but sometimes will say something insightful and remind everyone they're still there. Not much is actually known about him other than he's Nigerian, and he kind of relies on Al for all aspects of his finances. He actually doesn't talk about money that much, but coincidentally, one of the few times he does is the next episode, so let's move on to Season 1, Episode 4, The Streisand Effect. This episode follows two storylines, so as for the Darius one, it follows him and Ern traveling to a pawn shop to get money for Ern's old phone. While at the pawn shop, Darius notices a katana and makes Ern an offer. He can either take the money from the phone, or he can buy the katana and Darius will make him a lot more money. Ern needs the cash immediately, but tempted by the offer of more money, agrees and lets Darius buy the katana. Darius then takes the sword to a gang hideout where they trade it for a cane corso, which Darius then takes and sells to a dog breeder. Ern gets frustrated by this because he wouldn't be getting the money for another 2 months, and Darius promptly offers him another phone to sell, resolving the issue for the episode. But this brief storyline does illustrate how difficult it can be to rise out of poverty in a capitalist system. Ern needs money to provide for his family, so he sells his personal property to be able to meet his current needs. But Ern and his family don't just have current needs, they have future needs, and when they have needs to be fulfilled, someone will have to buy something by selling something. Oftentimes it's labor, but now it's a phone. When Darius presents Ern this option, it's representative of how money is made in the real world. Most wealthy people aren't becoming wealthier because of massive paychecks and hard work. What really makes them money is that they have so much extra money that they can invest it into other businesses and make more money without having to commit to the physical cost of producing it. Under this model, the real way of making more money is really only accessible if you already have it, which is a big problem for poor people who often don't. Thanks to this, although there are technically 2 options available, there is only one that can actually be taken. I mean, Ern could get the katana and wait the 2 months, but again, he would also need enough money to support himself and his family throughout the 2 months, illustrating that investment is really only an option when you have extra money. The second storyline in this episode follows Al dealing with an internet troll that names himself Zan, who's antagonizing Paperboy online to grow in popularity. Al goes to confront him and finds himself riding shotgun with Zan and his very young business partner as they deliver pizzas. Zan explains to Paperboy that he views his career as exploitation of his culture and his experiences because ultimately, Paperboy does want to get paid, which makes it okay for Zan to now take advantage of his career and exploit that for his own gain as an influencer. Al notices how Zan exploits literally everything in his life, recording every conversation he has just to find information worth selling to his popularity on YouTube, which he uses to sell shitty merchandise. Al finally has enough and leaves when Zan starts recording his young business partner getting robbed by an adult man. I think this storyline says a lot about how art and culture is influenced by interacting with each other, but also how easy it is to fall into exploiting that culture for profit. Movies, books, music, all art forms that generate profit for some larger entity are subject to this criticism. At what point is something created based on exploitation? With movies, for example, there are many examples of films who were created to make profit by exploiting nostalgia, violence, even the culture that Zan is accusing Paperboy of exploiting in this movie as well. And even if profit wasn't the explicit reason in the filmmaker's mind, I think it would be disingenuous to suggest that marketability isn't influencing at least some part of the creative process nowadays. But like films, with rap music, it would be insane to say that all rap music was created to make profit. Rap music for art's sake exists, but under a mindset influenced by capitalism, it's more difficult for Al to discern what his true intentions are. In Season 1, Episode 5, Nobody Beats the Biebs, Al's identity is again tested, this time not by his intentions, but by his social appearance.
Hey, you're that nigga that blew the other nigga's brains out. Cool.
While at a charity basketball game with celebrities, Al gets into beef with Justin Bieber. They argue on the court, which eventually leads to a physical altercation. The episode ends with Justin Bieber apologizing to the public, revealing a newfound dedication to Christ, and debuting a single off of his new album. While Al listens, he talks with a reporter who tells him that he should play his part as a rapper and be an asshole, because people like Justin Bieber are supposed to be the good guys. Now, before I get into the implications of our helpful advice, I wanted to talk about Atlanta's depiction of Justin Bieber in this episode, the most obvious aspect of it being they made Justin Bieber black, which I think is notable for 2 reasons. Justin Bieber has, for a long time, been the subject of controversy for his appropriation of black culture, from music to fashion to how he acts, while also benefiting from his whiteness by repeatedly getting second chances when he finds himself in another public controversy. Alan Sepinwall says, "Imagine if the real Bieber behaved the way he always does, and got into the trouble he always does. Only he looked like the actor playing him here, rather than a slightly more androgynous Kate McKinnon. He would not be greeted with the same level of adoration, and his mistakes wouldn't get quite so many boys will be boys excuses." The comparison is made even weirder and more surreal when the real Justin Bieber released his album Justice after the fake Bieber on his show announced an album with the same name years before. And in a decision so tone-deaf, it could have been in an Atlanta episode, Justin Bieber uses real recordings of Martin Luther King Jr.'s voice in his songs. Now that that's been discussed, let's get back into the implication of the advice the reporter gave Al at the end of the episode. When she tells Al to play his part, she specifically notes that because he's a rapper, he's supposed to present as an asshole, so pop musicians like Justin Bieber can be the nice guys. Now, rap can be made by all types of people from different backgrounds and upbringings, but the specific rap that Paperboy creates is one that he proudly proclaims to be inspired from his experiences of the streets. While rap can of course come in all tones and paces, types like the reporter tend to generalize it all into the type Paperboy makes, which tend to be the music influenced by the harsher side of growing up in poverty. Thus, as an outsider, the reporter hears lyrics about situations she's never been in before, and decisions she's never had to make, and makes an overgeneralized perception of rap and the people who create it as assholes. Ultimately, this generalization influences the public's perception of rap and creates a dynamic in which rap and the people who make it are the antagonists of pop culture or whatever, while pop musicians and other safer artists like Justin Bieber are seen as the good guys. This isn't good for multiple reasons, but if I could summarize it into its most simplest terms, I'd put it like this. Rap is an outlet for lots of black and poor artists to vent frustrations about their lives. When musicians put their experiences into music and put that music out into the world, the societal perception of rappers as assholes will prevent certain audiences from even trying any of them out. This creates a situation in which a certain group who is discussing their experiences through their art are not given the same respect, attention, or money because it either isn't as marketable, or because if poor and black people spoke on their experiences in front of an audience big enough, something might actually change. In Season 1, Episode 6, Value, we follow Van as she catches up with an old friend over dinner. This episode is by far the simplest of the season, but still manages to portray an interesting dichotomy between working class Van and her wealthier friend Jade, both with their life circumstances and the consequences of one night of fun. Over dinner, we get an insight into both of their lives and how they view each other. It's implied they're old friends who've gone on separate paths in life depending on their work. Van takes care of her daughter and works full-time while maintaining an on-again, off-again relationship with Earn and a couple other people. Jade, on the other hand, is kind of a professional girlfriend for lots of rich athletes and uses their money to fuel her lavish lifestyle. Throughout the dinner, she's presented as cocky, ignoring Van's request for a simple glass of wine and getting what she wants instead, while talking condescendingly. The conversation turns to the men in each of their lives and how this reflects their value as people. Jade suggests that the men that she dates and the lifestyle their money can provide shows her true value, something that she clearly holds in high regard. She's uncomfortable with the fact that Van is still with Earn and tells her she could be valuable as well if she lived more like her. This clearly shows their different perspectives on what makes a person great, but ironically also reveals what they hold valuable as well. Jade is willing to trade the chance of a real relationship for a superficial one as a means of increasing her economic status. When she suggests the same method to Van, she denies, not because her relationship with Earn is perfect, but because she values a flawed but real and strong relationship over the amenities of being in a higher class. Van and Jade end the night smoking some weed in a parking lot and reflecting back on the old times together before going home. The next morning, though, Van is woken up by an alarm that reminds her that she has a drug test at work that day. Freaking out, she calls Jade for help, who says she'll look around for answers, but ultimately just texts her that she couldn't figure it out and leaves her on her own. Van is left to her desperation, deciding to just tape a condom full of her daughter's clean piss to her leg, but while trying to unwrap it in the bathroom, it explodes. With nothing left to do, she confesses to smoking weed to her principal when asked why she didn't take a drug test. Her boss laughs it off, saying that everyone smokes weed just to deal with the stress of dealing with a failing system every day, before revealing they don't even have the budget to be conducting drug tests. They just do it to scare the employees. Before Van gets too relieved, however, she does decide to fire her for admitting to her drug use to a superior. In the end of the day, one dinner out and a quick smoke ended in two completely different outcomes, with Jade just going about her next day as if nothing happened, and with Van dealing with life-changing consequences after a single slip-up. While Jade does happen to be a wealthy person that doesn't have an actual job or income, it does also reflect the reality of what a single incident can mean to a poor person versus a rich person. It's also interesting how it's mentioned throughout that Van does not usually smoke weed while Jane does, and that this single incident cost her job, which does remind me of how, to an extent, drug consumption is seen as more acceptable if you're wealthy. In Season 2, Episode 3, Bag Shawty, Van and Earn have finally found some financial stability, and thanks to a new viral hit from Paperboy, have found some extra cash to enjoy. Bonding over how they both feel walked over and mistreated by strangers due to their status, they decide to use the money on a date night and go all out and get treated right. First heading out to a movie, Earn's $100 bill is rejected by the cashier for being too large. When he tries to pay with a debit card, the cashier tells him she'll need to make a copy of the card. Annoyed, they decide to leave, only to see a white man pay with a $100 bill just fine right after. Next, they go to a nightclub where Earn pays with a $100 bill to get in. Once sitting, the security guards come and tell him the $100 he used to pay is fake, and that he needs to pay with a different bill and then leave the establishment. As he's leaving, the bouncer tells him everybody knew that the bill was real, but the owner of the club was just tripping. After these two racist experiences, Earn calls Al and Darius up, and the four of them decide to head to a strip club, thinking it would be a good place to flaunt his bonus. At the club, Earn goes to exchange his money into singles, but is shocked to find it's a $200 minimum and a 20% deduction. He unhappily pays the price, and on the way back is heckled on by the stage announcer to throw money at one of the dancers he walks past. At the table, he finds out that on top of the price of the seating, there is also a $200 minimum for drinks and is forced to pay that as well. The dancers aren't very enthusiastic, and after Van asks Earn for money to give to a dancer that seems shy, Al reveals the dancer pretends to be shy in order to get sympathy tips from unsuspecting patrons. The entire night, Earn and Van have wanted to be able to flaunt the little amount of wealth they have and get treated right, only to be rejected twice and taken advantage of the third time, kind of showing that even when you have money, using it in excess can oftentimes just be a waste, as everything in this club that would usually give someone some sense of empowerment is designed to take advantage of them instead. Al then slides over to give his cousin some advice about the night's previous incidents and tells them to be treated better, he has to act better. While acting as himself, Earn gets rejected from the experiences of being a wealthier person, signaling to others that he is not a person who has these experiences, making them more suspicious of him. Al instead puts forward that to be able to use a $100 bill, he's got to act like the type of person who would have a $100 bill. This explanation from Alfred is flawed though, as we see in the next scene where Earn encounters professional American football player Michael Vick, racing people outside of a club for bets. Earn steps up confidently, stating he'll take on the challenge before suffering a humiliating defeat, as well as losing even more money. Alfred's suggestion that it's how he acts that prevents him from having wealthy experiences implies that being yourself is already enough to get you banned from these events, although we're also shown right after that acting confident also simply isn't enough. In Season 2, Episode 6, Teddy Perkins, perhaps Atlanta's most infamous episode, we follow Darius as he goes to pick up a free piano from a mysterious cellar. As he arrives, he meets the seller in a giant isolated mansion and is introduced to Teddy Perkins, a strange man with an unrealistic-like quality to his face. As the two sit down, Teddy begins to act strangely, speaking in a high-pitched voice and eating in a really messy way. He reveals to Darius that piano used to belong to a musician named Benny Hope, his brother, who he takes care of. Darius asks if his brother is still alive, and Teddy tells him he's somewhere in the mansion, although he won't let them meet on account of Benny's extremely sensitive skin condition. Darius doesn't believe that Teddy Perkins exists and thinks that Benny is using this persona as a way of coping, but decides to continue with the purchase because he wants the piano. Teddy shows him part of the mansion that will be turned into a museum dedicated to great fathers, as a tribute to his own father. What his father did to make Teddy think he was so great was implement a rigorous piano training program and beat him and his brother when they failed, something Teddy credits as the reason for Benny's success as a musician. This upbringing has twisted Teddy's understanding of greatness, as he now links suffering and art together in his mind and thinks that one cannot be created without the other. And to show you how twisted he became, he listed his father next to other great celebrity fathers like Marvin Gaye Sr., who famously killed his own son after years of domestic abuse. Darius finally gets his piano, but as he attempts to leave, the elevator takes him all the way down to the basement, where he encounters a man, all wrapped up and in a wheelchair, asking for help. The man writes on a small chalkboard, "Teddy will kill us both," and tries to persuade Darius to grab a shotgun from the attic. Darius, annoyed and still under the assumption that Teddy is playing a joke, tries to leave, but finds out his truck has been blocked in by Teddy's car. He returns to the house to get help, only to find Teddy watching a home movie of a piano lesson his dad gave Benny. Teddy pulls a shotgun on him and reveals he plans to kill him and stage it as a home invasion to garner interest in the museum, another sacrifice for the success of greatness. Darius tries to sympathize with him, revealing his own past with an abusive father and explaining that not all great art comes from great pain, sometimes it's love. Teddy disagrees with this sentiment, but before he can kill Darius, the man from the basement comes up in the elevator, catching them all by surprise. The man grabs the shotgun and kills Teddy before turning it on himself as well.
Wait! Oh, shit!
Now before I get into the themes, let's talk about the interpretations of this episode. If we look at it at face value, then Teddy was Benny's brother, and the man in the basement was Benny. However, because nothing is revealed or confirmed throughout, it can be said that these people are not who they say they are. In an interview with Hiro Murai, he refers to a shot of both Teddy Perkins and Benny in the home video as the same person. So could Darius's original interpretation of the situation have been true, and the man in the wheelchair actually be his father? Or could Teddy Perkins be Benny's father? He seems so set on making him suffer as much as possible, telling Darius that he keeps the blinds closed because it makes the house depressing, although maybe they'll get a great album out of it one day. It would also help explain why he wanted to build a museum dedicated to his father. The episode can be interpreted in a lot of ways. Teddy Perkins is also a clear reference to Michael Jackson, with the prosthetic that Donald Glover wore while portraying Teddy made to look like how he did at the end of his life. Now, it's clear why Jackson was chosen as the person to base Teddy's look off of, as the two have had similar experiences in childhood. Michael Jackson grew up physically and mentally abused by his father, who was convinced that the constant training would one day make him and his siblings great. Now, while Michael Jackson never got to live until he faded into obscurity, Benny and Teddy did, and now they get to sit and fester in the reminder that they're no longer great, so that they must suffer more. While Michael Jackson and Marvin Gaye Jr.'s fathers are just some famous examples, they are reflective of a larger societal mindset, namely that excessive training and discipline will lead to greatness. While it isn't explicitly stated, Teddy and his father are no longer creating art for the sake of art, and are instead creating it for, I won't say money because it isn't implied enough, but I will say for status and recognition. Ultimately, Teddy Perkins showcases situations in which, through abuse, a person stops working for the sake of the work, and instead of the pursuit of something artificial, representing both the experiences of a person who is then commodified and sold, or the average person who starts working for the sole reason of making money or producing profit. In Season 2, Episode 10, FUBU, we get a flashback of a time when Ern and Al were still in school. While shopping at a Marshall's, which for those of you who don't know is a chain of department stores in the US that basically sold off-brand or used versions of other products, so you could actually find a lot of stuff there for cheap. Anyway, while shopping, Ern finds a FUBU shirt, which was a popular clothing brand back in the 90s when they were founded, but haven't been around much lately. He begs his mom to buy the shirt for him, and she accepts, so excited to show off his new fit at school the next day, he heads out wearing the FUBU shirt. In class, he's complimented on his style, but bumps into Devin, another kid in his class, also wearing a FUBU shirt. As the kids inspect the shirt, they realize that there are minor differences, so one of them must be fake. Throughout the day, both kids are bullied relentlessly for possibly wearing a fake shirt, and it isn't until Al, who was previously in detention for selling a stolen calculator, tells everyone that Ern has the real shirt, and they're left alone. Ern feels guilty for the bullying that Devin receives, but it's soon forgotten as he's validated for his decisions by his classmates and receives his crush's phone number right after. The next day, Devin doesn't come to class, and it's revealed that he'd been struggling at home and the bullying drove him to suicide. Ern comes home disillusioned, only to have his mom present him with yet another FUBU shirt. Ern accepts it and sits down next to Alfred, who seemingly doesn't care. Now, it's never explicitly stated in the episode, but anyone who's been to a Marshall's can tell you that that FUBU shirt was definitely the fake one. This isn't a situation of hoping the shirt you bought was real. This was a question of what does Ern at this young age already value more, the social status that certain material goods can get him, or the feelings and treatment of a classmate. Instead of just being a sad memory for Ern, it becomes an interesting look into how these two young boys already have a problematic relationship with money and capitalism. Alfred's relationship is pretty easy to discuss, as he still basically has the same relationship, but the episode shows, already at a young age, recognizing the importance of money and what he would be willing to do when he doesn't have anything to sell. He still has some loyalty for his family, shown by what he does for Ern at the end of the episode, but he's basically always just been a bag chaser. Ern, on the other hand, places a high value on material goods because he's aware of what more expensive clothes can signal about a person. I don't believe for a minute that Ern thought that that FUBU shirt was real, but wanting to appear like the type of person who could afford a FUBU shirt, he begged his mom to buy it anyway. At school, everyone validates him, telling him how awesome the shirt is and hyping him up. As soon as there's a hint of one of the shirts being fake, of one of these two boys lying about their real position in life, they are shunned and bullied for the possibility of wearing a fake status symbol. Ern then decides he values the praise he would get for wearing a FUBU shirt, outweighs the consequences of what the bullies would do to Devin, and allows the lie to continue through Alfred. While this alone already illustrates Ern placing value in material possessions over the well-being of others, we're also shown that the entire world basically congratulates him for it. And through either truth or lies, he got rid of his competition and was congratulated and rewarded for being the real victor, allowing us not only to inspect Ern's guilt over this event, but also how he was conditioned to act this way as well. In Season 3 Episode 1, The Three Slaps, we're shown an opening scene the likes of Atlanta has never shown us before. Separated from the main narrative of the episode, we watch two men, one black and one white, have a conversation in a fishing boat out in the lake in the middle of the night. The conversation revolves around the lake they're on and how it was created by the government artificially to drown out a town of self-governed black people. The white man remarks that they were drowned out because they became too profitable. So profitable that they were almost white. This turns into a discussion about what constitutes a person as white. This entire conversation sets up Season 3 of Atlanta perfectly because this one, more than any other, deals with how capitalism links both race and class, and how they influence and corrupt each other. The man proposes that the black town could have been white because whiteness isn't a real thing beyond our made-up understanding of it. He insists that whiteness is less about race and more about your position in the world, remarking that with enough blood and money, anybody can become white. Our modern-day understanding of race is built on the original European conception of it, one that was created and used to justify centuries worth of slavery, exploitation, and pillaging against other parts of the world. Slavery and war had, of course, been around since forever, but as morals and ethics developed over time, Europe needed a way to categorize these other groups being taken over into inferior classes, making it okay for them to conquer them because of either racism or divine command. And the more you think about it, the more it makes sense. Imagine that you're just another European peasant, minding your own business, just getting by, when all of a sudden the ruling class brings in all of these other people who are from a different country and starts enslaving and abusing them. What stops one European worker from empathizing with an African slave? What stops them from beginning to think that if a black person can be abused like that, what does that mean for people like them? Well, the way the ruling class took care of this was by saying, we would never do anything like that to you. But to them, well, they're actually not even people. How race is understood today is just centuries worth of that previous system being molded to work for how the world works today. So when race is being talked about, it means more than just the color of your skin, but also the culmination of centuries worth of oppression. While it's true that some people of color today haven't experienced the physical oppression their parents or grandparents had, they can only be the result of all the socioeconomic opportunities their parents gave them, who can only be the result of all their opportunities their parents gave them, and so on. While skin color is just a single factor that plays into race, Atlanta argues that history and socioeconomic status can be just as influential when it comes to identity. I'm going to skip ahead a few episodes to Season 3, Episode 9, Rich Wigga, Poor Wigga, another standalone episode that discusses the relationship between class, race, and identity. This episode, notably the only one shot in black and white, follows a mixed-race student applying for university. The episode uses the black and white cinematography to confuse the audience about the main character's racial identity. Before we're shown him, we're shown his room. Photos of him with friends at a hockey game, a Post Malone poster, and a hilarious Logan Paul comedy tour poster. All things meant to set up that this character is white or really enjoys and is involved in things that are generally associated with white people. While playing an online game, and while the audience is still unsure about the character's identity, he insults someone by calling them the N-word with the hard R, and then making monkey noises. This brief scene already sets up a mixed-race character with a complicated relationship to his identity. Investing in stereotypical white things, hanging out with white friends, all while hurling racial insults towards black people. Although interestingly enough, he does still refer to himself as a black person later in the episode. Anyway, all of his friends just got into an expensive university he wants to go to, but he can't afford it. While complaining about this to his father, he tells him that his white friends must have convinced him the world works some other way, because the only way he will ever have enough money to go to that school is by working for it himself, something that none of his friends have had to take into consideration. While at school that day, he's struggling to find a way to tell his girlfriend about his difficult position when a school rally is announced and all the students gather in an auditorium. Former alumni and current millionaire Robert S. Lee stopped by the high school to give a guest speech. During the speech, Robert reveals he's planning on paying every student's college tuition.
Who's black?
As the students complain about racism and discrimination, Aaron walks through the halls trying to figure out if he would qualify or not. When he goes to visit Robert, however, he discovers the hallway full of kids trying to prove their blackness, since Robert doesn't count race, but a very specific cultural experience as what makes someone black. Aaron goes in to try to prove his blackness and is asked questions like name a few things that mix well with Hennessy and how he reacts to the most recent police shooting. After a few rounds of these questions, Robert Lee reveals he won't be giving Aaron any of the scholarship money because he's actually white. Disappointed, Aaron heads home, where he gets a call from his girlfriend wanting to break up with him. Enraged, he decides to make a homemade flamethrower and take it to school, only to find another student, Felix, there with the same plan. Felix was also rejected for a scholarship. Because he was born in Nigeria, he doesn't have all the cultural context an American would have, and was also unable to answer all the questions correctly. The two get in an argument about their race, with Aaron saying he understands what the board means, and that since he's from Nigeria and can trace his roots, he isn't really black, at least how it's typically defined in the US. Felix argues back that background doesn't matter when his social perception will always be worse than Aaron's, because Aaron can pretend to be white. He points out that while Aaron built a flamethrower and brought it from home, Felix had to build his flamethrower while hiding behind the school. Any other way, and someone would have called the police on him immediately. After Aaron makes a dark skin joke, Felix begins to burn down the school, and the two boys chase each other until eventually Felix gets shot by the police. Aaron is then arrested for attempting to burn the school down, and Felix is transported to the hospital. Robert Lee arrives at the school and asks what happened, later deciding to give Felix the scholarship money because getting shot by the police is the blackest thing you can do. A year later, we find Aaron working in a retail store, but something's changed. His hair, his style, his speech have all changed to things more commonly associated with black culture. He seems to be more confident as well, and while flirting with a customer, he's interrupted by his ex-girlfriend, who seems shocked by how much he's changed. The episode ends with him telling her,
"I've never been more attracted to you in my life."
Now, throughout the episode, Aaron is a character who's taken advantage of his appearance and presentation however it suits him. First presenting as white because he had white friends, and maybe even realizing sometime down the line the way it affected his day-to-day life as well. Now, in the end, it's clear that although he changed his personality and look, he still wasn't accepted into college, so he's now just using his newfound confidence to hit on women, still using a look or style to his game. Now, I could talk about why Aaron felt that an association with white culture was better than being associated with black culture, but I'd hope everyone here would be able to figure out that part on their own. So instead, I think it'll be much more interesting to look at the role the capitalist, or Robert S. Lee, plays in the story. First off, I need to get this established. Both Aaron and Felix are just as black as each other, and just as black as the other students who Robert Lee counted black as well in the school. Culture and history are being projected onto one person's ideal version of what a black person should be, which only includes a very specific type of person. The results of the test upset both Aaron and Felix and drive them to compete with each other over who the blackest of the two are. But in reality, there's nothing to compete over. They're both having two separate experiences of being black in America. However, there is one thing that both Aaron and Felix, as well as the other kids who got accepted and denied, have in common that isn't being acknowledged. None of these kids can afford their education. When Kevin Samuels announces that he's paying all of the seniors' college tuitions, the entire auditorium cheers. Then, when he announces he'll only be paying for black students, he separates them by race, and then separates them further by culture. What started out as a big group of students got divided and separated from each other until only a small group qualified for help. I do want to say that I think it's also okay that there are programs specifically targeted for black or Latino people, because these are the communities affected hardest by capitalism, and their specific experiences should be discussed further, but in the context of this episode, I'm using the billionaire's action to illustrate a larger point. I think it's also interesting that I don't see this as a conscious decision on Robert Lee's part. Throughout the episode, he seems genuine in his efforts to want to help this specific type of black person. Not out of maliciousness for anyone else, but just out of respect for this type of person he's helping. I see Robert as a sort of stand-in for black capitalism in a way, someone who quote-unquote made it big and is now trying to show he cares about the black community. We've already discussed previously in this video how race as a concept was created as a way of improving the capitalist system by proving a moral reason for exploitation. We've also talked about how whiteness as a label was created for those at the top of the system and can be given and taken further away depending on the circumstance. As a system, capitalism relies on further and further division in the working class to prevent a growing class consciousness. Take for example the United States in the 19th century during the Irish potato famine. During the 1840s and 50s, many Irish immigrants came to the US to look for work and housing. This surplus in people caused problems for employment, housing, and food, causing lots of people to hate the Irish and hire them in jobs that were at the time considered work for black people because they would work for cheap and they also weren't black. But now, as the business owners, you have a dilemma. How can you, a morally upright white man, pay another white man the same wage for the same work that you were just paying someone you considered subhuman? How could you justify it to yourself? Easy. Irish people weren't white, they were just Irish. And like Americans convince themselves to separate from Irish people by dividing them through culture and further exploit them, Robert Lee is doing the same thing and dividing black students through what he perceives to be the correct culture. Man, that was a long episode breakdown. Let's do something short and fun for the next one. Season 3, Episode 4, The Big Payback, deals with the themes of reparations for slavery and critical race theory. I'm gonna mention this now because it will let me cut in and out of explaining the story, but the episode largely deals with a white person's over-exaggerated perception of what reparations are and the feelings of guilt that come with accepting it. So when some of the over-the-top things happen in this episode, it's not like I or Donald Glover are saying this is what it'll be like when time for reparations come. In yet another episode that doesn't follow the main cast, and instead another one-off character, we follow Marshall, a recently divorced man, picking up his daughter from his ex's house and taking her to school. As he leaves the school and heads to work, he hears a story on the radio about a black man who sued a Tesla investor for enslaving his grandfather and won a lot of money in the settlement. At work, Marshall and his co-workers are shocked to hear that their company has been affected with a similar lawsuit and are expecting layoffs as well. His white co-workers are freaking out, trying to discern if any slave owners are in their family tree, while his black co-workers party in the background. On the way home from school, his daughter asks him if they're racist, and when he assures her that they're not, she asks if their family used to own slaves. He deflects from this question, stating since their family are Austro-Hungarian and they were enslaved by the Byzantine Empire, does this mean they get to claim reparations from Hungary as well? Now, this is a common deflection used by people who are against reparations. What's so different from slavery against black people in America? Slavery is as old as time and we were once all slaves. What makes them so special? Well, the difference here is that slavery like the one mentioned in this episode took place 17 centuries ago, whereas there are people alive today who remember family members who were enslaved. We already spoke earlier about the ways most money is made not through work, but by investments, a door only open to people who have extra money. Well, it stands to reason that white people in America at the time slavery ended had a lot more money than black people and were thus given more opportunities and able to pass more opportunities down to their kids. Black Americans were forced to start at the bottom, earning everything through meager wages, while already established white Americans were able to build businesses, invest, and be involved in the government. And while the individual white Americans who never owned slaves but still received these opportunities because of the effects of slavery aren't actually directly responsible, they are profiting off of this systemic inequality, and I think if a direct link between one family and another via ownership can be established, reparations is more than a fair thing to be asked. And listen, I don't think anyone, not even Marshall, needed an explanation on why slavery 1700 years ago is the same as 160 years ago. But this comparison came out of an awkward position, assuming that accepting reparations is the same as accepting that you, as a person, were responsible for slavery, a fear later literalized in this episode. I get it though, it's hard to accept someone has had a leg up their whole life because of an evil system. It may be hard to even recognize it. If privilege is all you've known, then equality may look like oppression to you. But let me put this scenario into another one we can probably all relate to. You're probably watching this video on a phone or a MacBook, or maybe even a TV of some kind that was manufactured using cobalt mined by a child laborer who isn't being paid for his work. That coffee you drank this morning, that chocolate you ate last week, was more than likely picked from plants by people who will never be able to try these things. The system we live in today is one that already, in every facet of our lives, thrives on the exploitation of others, and while none of us as individuals shoulder the blame for the creation or implementation of the system, I think feeling guilty for profiting from the system is something that's more than reasonable and almost essential in taking it apart. Back to the episode though, as Marshall and his daughter sit down to have dinner together, a black woman named Shaniqua Johnson arrives at his house and tells him that she is suing him because his family owned her ancestors, demanding a total of $3 million. The next day at work, most of his black coworkers are absent, and he spots a white man wearing a shirt that declares "I own slaves," a physical representation of what Marshall fears he's admitting if he accepts that his family profited off of the slave system. We see these fears literalized even further when his ex-wife later refuses to let him see his daughter and requests he finalizes the divorce before his upcoming legal battles. He's also chased out of his house by Shaniqua and her family, ending up at a hotel where he meets another white man who finds himself in the same situation as him. The two have a discussion about their legal battles, with Marshall venting how he's being attacked for something he didn't even do. The other man tells him the way slavery is seen by white people is that it's a history that can be explored, investigated, or thought about whenever they choose to or are comfortable engaging with it. But the reality for black people is that slavery and its effects are a cruel and unavoidable ghost. Coping with this fact, the man says, can turn whiteness and its privilege into a curse, being able to enjoy a more comfortable life, but dealing with the guilt of what their privilege means for the rest of the world. He tells Marshall that both of them will be okay, before going outside to the pool and committing suicide. Sometime later, we're shown Marshall not as distressed and seemingly in a normal place in life again, working in a restaurant as a waiter. He goes to report that he has to pay a restitution tax to Shaniqua, returns to work, and the episode ends. After all the drama, all the resistance, and the guilt, Marshall and all the other white people affected by restitution end up fine. There's no huge life changes, he isn't suddenly at the bottom now and has to start all over again. In the end, Marshall and all the white people will be fine and life will continue, hopefully on a little more of a level playing field. In Season 3, Episode 6, White Fashion, we again follow two separate storylines, but this time of the main cast. Oh yeah, and for everyone watching who maybe hasn't seen the show and is wondering where the hell Ern and all the others have been for the past few episodes, Atlanta does this thing that it established in the first season but didn't really lean into up until this season, where they have a lot of one-off episodes following different stories away from the main story. A lot of people didn't like these episodes, but some of them have ended up being some of my favorites, so I didn't mind them. Anyway, it's been a long time since I've talked about the position of the main cast, so let me recap. In the end of Season 2, Ern and Al's bond strengthened, and they committed themselves to working with each other. During that time, Al's popularity as a rapper has exploded to the point that he's now part of an international tour, and the crew has been getting accustomed to a nicer lifestyle. Al's also been dealing with identity issues throughout the season, struggling to balance between the rapper persona he puts on and wanting to stay real to himself and his community. To set up the episode, Darius, Al, and Ern are all invited to a fashion house in London that has gotten themselves into some recent controversies when they released racially insensitive clothing. They want Al to sit on their diversity advisory committee to show that the company is truly committed to making change. Unable to pay him directly, however, they give him free clothes and donation to a charity of his choice. As he's getting measured for all his new clothes, Ern criticizes him for being a part of this deal, saying it feels like an Uncle Tom photo shoot and that the company is using him because of his race to help their social perception. Al tells them he knows, but it wouldn't make sense to refuse free clothes, so Ern tells him that if it were him, he would use his influence to build a program to help black people. At a press release to announce new members of the diversity board, Alfred meets Khalil and some of the other activists, who all seem more interested in themselves and the experience and are almost proud of their job title of apologizing for white people. During a public panel, Paperboy is asked if racism will be over, and when he states that it definitely won't, Khalil corrects him by telling the press that with their collaboration, they expect racism to be over in 2024, a comment that starts to make Alfred uncomfortable with being associated with these people. During the actual meeting, Alfred suggests creating a campaign that educates black people to reinvest into their neighborhoods, an idea that gets a lukewarm response from the group. The others are asked what they want and start asking for clothing, plane trips, and movie premiere tickets. Alfred interrupts, asking how any of these things help black people, to which one of the members responds that,
Look, I'm black and it's helped me a whole lot, so.
My nigga, are you black?
The others tell him not to step out of line, as they've been doing social justice for a while and know what they're doing. We never actually find out what any of these influencers actually do. The most information we get is that one of them wrote a book, and the other one started an organization that was like Blue Man Group, but activism. Which, look, writing a book, getting it published, that's a valid form of activism. I don't know what the book's about, so can't really judge on if it's any good or not, but the Blue Man Group idea kind of plays into the whole theme of this episode that capitalism commodifies struggle. I'm gonna need to make an assumption here, but based on Khalil's personality and what we know about him from this episode, I'm going to assume that 1, it isn't free, 2, the performance generates at least some type of profit, and 3, it's the most basic, base level form of activism there is, something that doesn't say anything new, just kind of states the obvious. I mean, it doesn't seem like the type of thing that would be out convincing a lot of people of anything. So if all you really do is get a lot of people who already agree with you to pay you to entertain them, reaffirm their beliefs, and then do nothing but give them the sense that they already did their part, then I'd argue that you're actually doing more harm to the movement than contributing to the evolution of its ideas. Paperboy tells the group that black people don't really fuck with them because they know that most of the time they're full of shit, and reintroduces his ad campaign idea. He specifically explains his concept of a black woman going to a black business owner as a premise for the ad. After some discussion, the group decides to follow through on the project, and Alfred pitches the concept to the board at the fashion house. They accept it and produce the ad, only for it to not really end up like Alfred intended it to. Understandably, Al shows up to the head office enraged, claiming that they all lives mattered his ad and took away from its original meaning, an accusation to which the heads respond by saying they simply made it more inclusive. He asks about the scholarship and mentorship programs he proposed, and they reveal they farmed them out to the Red Cross. Khalil takes Alfred out of the office, laughing, and asks him what he expected. A program that teaches black people to reinvest into themselves and their neighborhoods directly contradicts what would make the company profit, so under no circumstance was an ad like Al's ever going to be created. He continues to tell him if he wants to make real change, he should create a charity for himself and have the money donated to him. While I'm untrusting of what Khalil and other activists like them actually do with the money they're given, he does make a good point about the company. White fashion presents us with an industry, fashion, but it could just as easily have been any other, be it technology, pharmaceutical, you name it, that stands in as an industry that thrives on exploiting black people and others living in South America, Africa, the Middle East, and Asia who are actually producing these products. It isn't directly mentioned, but the fashion industry is notorious for exploiting labor from underpaid workers in unsafe working conditions, so it wouldn't surprise me if that's why it was chosen for the episode. The industry then takes a person, pays them to act as if everything is alright, and makes any criticism of the company simply disappear. Alfred made a valid attempt in trying to do some good. Education is one of the most crucial forms of activism after all. But ultimately, the ad campaign is changed to be one more in favor of the company for 2 reasons. The first and most obvious one is that any ad that educated people to invest into themselves would eventually cost the business money, and since it was, a business with no incentive or regulations to do anything but grow, has no actual reason to do anything to hurt its profits. And the second reason they changed the ad to be more inclusive is the ad would no longer focus on educating black people, so they'd be less likely to stop buying their products, and more people overall would feel targeted by the ad. I guess putting it that way, both of the reasons that the company would have never helped the social movement progress really just boils down to money. Well, since we're done with the A plot, I can get over to the B plot now. There's also a C plot, but it's so minimal that I won't even bother going over it here. The B-plot of White Fashion follows Darius chilling at the fashion house, getting approached by the hospitality manager, confused about what his order of jollof rice is, since no one working at the office seems to know what it is. I find it kind of funny that she says my husband and I know every Michelin place in town, because, and I don't know if it's intentional or not, but Michelin has not given a single Michelin star to a restaurant of African cuisine. So if Michelin is all you know, then that would actually make a lot of sense. She asks him where she can buy some jollof, and they both take a trip to a nearby Nigerian-owned restaurant where Darius has a very nice moment with the owner and actually gets to engage in and about his culture. I also really like that when he explains what jollof is to the hospitality manager, he specifically makes note and is proud of the fact that it's Nigerian jollof. I know this is a real thing, and it reminds me of how Peruvians are proud of their ceviche. The hospitality manager enjoys the jollof rice as well as the all-around vibe of the restaurant, but instead of enjoying the fact that she's privileged enough to be granted just a peep into another culture, her mind instantly goes to the growth potential of the restaurant. Sometime later, Darius walks to the restaurant to find that it's closed and discovers the hospitality manager across the street from it operating a commissary kitchen selling Nigerian food. She invites him to free jollof, and when he asks about where Mimi, the owner of the restaurant, is, the hospitality manager informs him that the landlord had been looking to sell, so she offered to pay more, and Mimi and her restaurant were evicted from the property. Darius can't even bring himself to take a bite, so he leaves, throwing the bowl away. Now, we can't talk about this story from one perspective, so we have to talk about how they intertwine. First off, let's talk about Mimi, who is from Nigeria and has moved to London in order to open a restaurant that serves food from her culture. Her landlord is unhappy with her, so she probably isn't making enough money as she should be, but she's trying her best. Then along comes the capitalist who comes in for a meal and instead of just enjoying it, sees an opportunity to make money. Being from the UK and clearly more wealthy than Mimi, she can afford to spend more money in startup capital than Mimi even generates in profit, so when it comes to buying out the location from her, it isn't even a question for the landlord. But instead of committing to recreating the authentic Nigerian experience, one that clearly meant so much to Darius, a cheaper, more profitable version of the food and experience was created. And since it was, again, created for the sole purpose of creating profit, the original version was made unsustainable. I think it's also vital to point out not only what this means as an individual story, but as a consistent trend, and what that implies for immigrants from poorer countries. It's a very grim implication when you begin to think about what it says about the system, who not only made these countries poor based on their race, but ensures that immigrants from said countries are less likely to succeed under a capitalist structure because a wealthier investor can repackage any idea or cultural experience to be more affordable and accessible. Now, this episode breaks down two myths. One of the company that selflessly contributes towards a social cause or progress, and the other of the ingenious capitalist opportunist who climb their way to the top without hurting or taking advantage of anybody, by saying this is how the system actually works, and not only is it how it works, but under the system, doing anything else would actually be illogical. By putting us in the shoes of two people who are affected by these negative outcomes, and presenting the situation very directly, the episode doesn't give us any answers to these issues, but just asks the audience to think on how they feel about it. In Season 3, Episode 7, Trini to the Bone, we follow an upper-middle-class white family as they discover their nanny, Sylvia, a Trinidadian native, has unexpectedly passed away. Unsure of how to deal with the situation, the parents, Miles and Bronwyn, send their son Sebastian off to school without telling him. As Sylvia was really close with Sebastian, they decide to tell him later, to which he doesn't really have a reaction to, although he does ask if he can go to her funeral. As they arrive, they're introduced to Sylvia's family and are confused as to how their son knows about and fits in so well with Trinidadian and Tobagonian culture. The funeral proceeds, and although it starts off simple enough, the ceremony is soon interrupted by Sylvia's daughter, who has had some grievances she needs to air out. She reflects on her mom's title as a woman who sacrificed everything to provide, having spent her entire life laboring as a caretaker. Her daughter begins to feel bitter that her mother's sacrifice also included time with her family and the experience of raising them, something Sylvia missed out on because she was too busy working, taking care of other people's kids. The funeral erupts with strange things like fights, Chet Hanks, and a woman climbing into the coffin happening all around the family, and they decide to leave, but they're stopped at the door when one of Sylvia's relatives realize their behavior has scared the family and their child.
You all need to calm down right now. Look, you're scaring the white people. No.
He explains to Sebastian that everything is okay, and this outburst is just how they express their grief. That night, Miles and Bronwyn talk about their involvement in Sebastian's life, scared that one day he might feel like Sylvia's daughter felt towards her. As they try to reassure each other, they are good parents. Miles is awoken by knocking on the door to find a family picture day portrait from Sebastian's school, a picture that Sylvia took with their son rather than them. Now, this episode deals with how money and the emphasis on the pursuit of it affects familial relationships and demonstrates how this manifests itself into two different ways for two different families with different relationships to money. Starting off with Sylvia and her family, we know from her daughter's speech at her funeral that she sacrificed everything to her work so she could provide. Although she's clearly very appreciated, this constant need to be working caused her to miss out on crucial life events. Something which caused her kids a lot of pain, knowing it was her job to be providing those experiences to other children. Now let's take a look at Miles and Bronwyn and their relationship to their son Sebastian. This family is shown to be one that is quite well off, owning a fancy modern apartment in the city, a son who goes to a private school, and being able to afford a full-time nanny because both parents work jobs. Their relationship with their son, though, isn't one that is as strong as the Trinidadian family, however. They don't really talk much, and Sylvia seems to be more of an influence on Sebastian's behavior and what he likes. All those moments that Sylvia missed out on with her family, she was having and forming those bonds with kids like Sebastian. But the real question we should be asking is, why did she even have to? I mean, from her side, it's obvious. She needed money, so she left her family. But what a lot of people ignore is that Marshall and Bronwyn are both choosing to leave their son to go to work and make money. Now, listen, I get it, times are tough. I don't know a single person living in the United States who doesn't have as many parents working as physically possible. It's tough out there, and being a stay-at-home parent is basically a dead dream by now. That being said, Miles and Bronwyn aren't the vast majority. They clearly have money and seemingly enough of it that calling a day off of work for the both of them is something that doesn't cause financial strain. Depending on their work, I believe that the way they're living now, they could be spending almost as much as they're making. But that's the thing though, they don't really have to live how they're living now. They are the ones choosing to forego time and relationship with their son in exchange for the opportunity to accumulate more wealth, when, if they wanted to, they could have a relationship and parenting experiences with him rather than pay someone else to have them. To be honest, as depressing as this episode can be, it's one that you can clearly tell was written with warmth and empathy for all of the characters, from Miles and Bronwyn, who realize in the end that maybe they had misjudged their values and missed out on crucial bonding moments with their son, to Sylvia's family, who are left to grieve not only her, but all the time she missed out on because she was stuck at work. Season 3 of Atlanta was the show finding and being comfortable enough in its space to go for and say the things it wanted to say, and although Season 4 would be, in my opinion, just as good, it contains less criticism of capitalism and how it intersects with race, so I don't have too much to say about individual episodes, but I will go through some minor things here and there. In the episode Work Ethic, Van takes Lottie to a film set run by Mr. Chocolate, a clear stand-in for Tyler Perry, a prominent African-American filmmaker and the owner of his own production studio. Tyler is often criticized for his rushed production periods and quick output of movies and shows that often seem to rely purely on black stereotypes as the source of humor. How rushed are his production periods, I hear you ask? Well, in the last 6 years, on top of working on other movies and such, Tyler Perry has written, directed, and produced no less than 14 different television shows. He's also notorious for not using a writer's room, saying that WGA writers submit imperfect scripts on purpose so that they can get paid for rewrites, and he's also just not an overall fan of unions forming underneath him either. For Van and Lottie at least, this results in experiencing a film set that is run by a voice on an intercom that mindlessly sends out scripts and rushes productions even though it clearly affects the final product. Everyone working in the studio seems to be in a state where they believe Mr. Chocolate is some type of god and what he says goes, and they're thankful for any opportunity given to them. While Tyler Perry still has quite a few dedicated fans of his content, I think the frustration against it can be best summarized by Jamila Lemieux's open letter to Perry on the radio, where she expresses her frustration towards the only media being produced catering to a specific stereotype of black person because it sells more money, specifically noting his portrayal of the Medea character because, through her, the country has laughed at one of the most important members of the black community, Mother Dear, the beloved matriarch. Our mothers and grandmothers deserve much more than that. In the episode Dat Killer, while Al is busy dealing with a local mass shooting, Darius and Ern have found a seller for a brand new pair of sneakers that have sold out. They get into the seller's van and, after verifying the shoe's authenticity, ask how much it would cost. The seller doesn't want any money and tells the two all he wants in exchange for the shoes is for them to kiss each other. Darius is immediately fine with it, but Earn needs a moment to think about it. He rationalizes that the shoes are just material goods and that they, as black men, put an excessive amount of value into them and argues that they're above having to perform for a pair of shoes. Darius recognizes that Earn has a good point, but decides that the principle of not spending extra money outweighs the principle of kissing a homie for some shoes, and they go ahead and do it. This being America though, while Darius and Earn are kissing, the shoe man is shot by a stray bullet, so the two just take the shoes and leave. In the final standalone episode of the series, The Goof That Sat by the Door, we watch a fictionalized documentary that follows Thomas Washington, a black animator at Disney that is accidentally turned into CEO, and tries his best to make a Goofy movie, or as this episode puts it, the blackest movie of all time. Now, even excluding how technically creative and realistic this fake documentary is, there's enough to talk about with how Thomas Washington is framed. Thomas relates strongly to Goofy, feeling that he is representative of black people in the Mickey Mouse world, a feeling that isn't understood by his white colleagues. When he gets the opportunity to be CEO, by accident of course, he doesn't hold back, so he takes his favorite character and makes a movie about him that deals with all the issues black people have to face today. The movie does go over systemic issues and ends on Goofy and his son sitting in the seat of revolutionary Huey P. Newton. But as the movie goes further and further into production, Thomas begins to crack under the pressure, eventually disappearing, an event that Disney is implied to be behind. There is definitely not some huge message behind it, and there's nothing super deep to analyze, but it's still a very entertaining episode that acknowledges a lot of issues. If you liked it, I recommend the Robert Downey Sr. movie, Putney Swope, a comedy that basically follows the same premise and format, but instead of Disney in the 90s, it's an advertising firm in the 60s. And on that note, we've almost made it to the end. I'm now going to talk about the characters of Al and Earn and how they've developed from season to season, and what that growth says about the system that facilitated it. For Earn, I saw most of his growth throughout the show revolve around his relationship with Van. Identity and poverty did play a big deal as well, but his final episode with Van focused entirely almost on his confidence in himself and what he wants. That being said, although it isn't discussed, Earn clearly saw a pretty big change in social status from season 1 to 4. Season 1 Earn was constantly worried about money, usually dressed in the same fit throughout, a simple t-shirt and pants. But by season 3 and 4, money is no longer that much of an issue. He's bought an all-new wardrobe, can afford getaways and vacations for his family, and drives a nicer car. A simple reading of the series can conclude that since Earn went from poor to rich by virtue of his hard work, the show is somehow making some kind of connection between being successful and working hard. But let's take a look at the series as a whole. I think the reason it feels so good to see Earn enjoy his success in the end is because we've seen all the bullshit that they've all had to go through. The show wasn't about the end goal, it was always about their day-to-day lives and the struggles they've had to go through. Looking back, I think it's disingenuous to think that the creators intended to portray any of these facets of life as good or normal things, but instead were criticizing their existence in the first place, even though our main characters do surpass them. Al's journey is similar to that of Earn's, but focuses more specifically on aspects of his identity and how they were influenced by his environment. The first season focuses mostly on how, as soon as he enters the public's eye, he's stereotyped as a violent thug because he's a black man. Later he gets arrested over a shooting that started because of an argument about money. In the same season, a reporter informs him that if he wants to make money and succeed, he should play his part and be exactly what people expect him to be. In a club, he tries to play into this new personality that's been forced onto him, but when he looks around and doesn't recognize anyone, he becomes uncomfortable. In season 2, Alfred is forced to make a choice about faking part of his personality to boost his career, and in season 3, Alfred seems fed up with his massive tour and struggles with trusting the intentions of the people around him. By season 4, Alfred has purchased an isolated farmhouse, and after a fight with a wild hog, finds content away from his fame and his wealth. I think his whole journey is pretty simply put in one of his final conversations with Earn, in which his cousin calls him asking about some contract information to discuss, and Al decides he'd rather not work, excuses himself, and is left alone again, a nice reversal from the Al in the earlier seasons, who was often writing on Earn to put more effort into his job. You know, I don't often watch TV shows. It's a huge investment in time and effort, and I'm much more likely to have a stronger emotional reaction to a film. I do have a list of 3 TV shows that I do rewatch every year or two, and I suppose you could call it my list of favorite TV shows. That list includes BoJack Horseman, of course, Normal People, and Atlanta. Each of them are prime examples of visual and creative storytelling, and I can't respect or thank them enough. I hope that if for whatever reason you haven't watched Atlanta yet, you will start right away, and that if you have, maybe you'll see the show through a different perspective the next time you rewatch it. I've said all I have to say, so enjoy the rest of your day, and peace.
I can trust in the melody, in the song I can find me. Ever since I lost you